He said, you know, listen, if you guys publish this article and there is another 9/11, we're going to be called before Congress to explain how we failed to prevent it. He was saying, in effect, you, Arthur Sulzberger, will have blood on your hands if there's another attack that could have been prevented by this program. You know, I think anybody would feel goosebumps.
Welkom bij Panorama. Vandaag deel 2 van onze reeks over de NSA, de Amerikaanse inlichtingendienst die het telefoon- en internetgebruik van Jan en alleman in en buiten de Verenigde Staten in de gaten hield. Edward Snowden, die als computerspecialist werkte voor de NSA, was niet de eerste die de verregaande spionagepraktijken naar buiten bracht. Ook in de jaren voordien waren er personeelsleden die vonden dat de NSA zijn boekje te buiten ging en die kozen voor de nucleaire optie. In het jargon van de geheime diensten is dat codetaal voor de pers op de hoogte brengen. Maar dat doe je in Amerika niet zonder gevolgen. Deel 2 van onze reeks The United States of Secrets begint op de dag dat in de metro van Madrid doden vallen.
In Madrid this morning, more than 190 people were killed and more than...
De zwaarste aanslag sinds 11 september zet het observatieprogramma van de Amerikaanse veiligheidsdienst NSA weer op de rails.
Given that starkness of the Al-Qaeda threat, given the ambiguity of the situation, I thought the correct operational, legal, and ethical decision was, all right, we'll do this one more time on the somewhat different framework.
And so they're sort of literally, you know, they're sort of sifting through the FISA law. They're sifting through the Patriot Act, trying to find existing laws, existing authorities, you might call it loopholes, to justify these programs.
Generaal Hayden moet bij het FISA-akkoord, dat toekijkt op de geheime diensten, een machtiging loskrijgen.
Could we get a court order to authorize this? And so we began a very aggressive program with the chief judge of the FISA court at that time, Judge Catelli, to take that part of the program that had been stopped and present it to her to see if we could get an order to allow that program to go forward.
Hayden personally meets with Judge Catelli of the FISA court on 2 Saturdays to make the pitch, to explain how they're going to do this. And Catelli eventually rules that this is legal, that the NSA can indeed collect all of the internet metadata going to and from the United States. And they use this authority that previously was used to trace numbers going to and from a single telephone for everybody.
Caller Catelli gebruikt een omstreden interpretatie van een 25 jaar oude zaak bij het Hoge Rechtshof.
This was frankly a huge stretch. The idea that you could use this to justify the collection of trillions of pieces of internet metadata surprised a lot of people when it came out in the Snowden archives, but that's where they went.
De program is weer actief en uitgebreider dan daarvoor.
That part of the program over which there was a grand dispute in the spring of 2004 was resumed in large measure under a different legal theory by the fall of 2004.
Bush on day 2 of his tour to defend the Patriot Act, this time in Buffalo, New York.
In Buffalo, he continued his push for an extension of the anti-terror law.
Dat jaar wil de president iedereen ervan overtuigen dat er geen observatieprogramma zonder machtiging bestaat.
Nothing has changed, by the way. When we're talking about chasing down terrorists, we're talking about getting a court order before we do so.
Bush got up there several times and said, you know, when you hear about our wiretapping, that means we're getting a court warrant. Well, we knew that wasn't true. You know, he was leaving out this whole other side of the equation that in terms of the NSA operation.
It's important for our fellow citizens to understand constitutional guarantees are in place. when it comes to doing what is necessary to protect our homeland, because we value the Constitution. Thank you for coming.
De plechtige verzekeringen van de president maken het voor Thomas Tam van het Vice-akkoord nog moeilijker om de waarheid te dragen.
I agonized probably for months. I was upset, I would say, with what I thought was being done to the way our government was supposed to work.
Tam weet niet dat Jack Goldsmith en de top van justitie bijna hun ontslag hebben aangeboden. Maar zijn bezorgdheid over het programma blijft toenemen.
He agonized about this, spent a lot of sleepless nights, wondered about what he should do.
It just kind of ate away at me, and it was pretty clear to me, at least, that I didn't want to keep participating in whatever was going on.
Uiteindelijk doet Tam iets wat totaal niet lijkt te passen bij iemand wiens vader en oom bij de FBI gewerkt hebben. Op een dag glipt hij tijdens de lunch weg naar een metrostation. Vanuit een telefooncel belt hij anoniem naar de New York Times.
He said he was sweating, nervous, looking around. He felt, he said, like a spy when he made that phone call. But he did.
I certainly was conscious of the fact that if I were going to be found out, and I did think I would be found out actually eventually, that there would be serious ramifications, but I just thought it was important.
Tam heeft een speciale reporter op het oog.
I had read articles by Eric Lichtblau with the New York Times. I knew he was covering the Department of Justice.
Lichtblau zal zijn bron nooit bekendmaken, maar bevestigt het anonieme telefoontje wel.
There was a suggestion from one of the early sources that whatever is going on involving this super sensitive spy program was causing such tumult and debate within the Justice Department that there's talk of Ashcroft being indicted, and that certainly gets your attention.
Tam en Lichtblau ontmoeten elkaar een paar keer in het geheim.
I eventually told him my suspicions that very, very limited people knew what it was all about, and that really some very experienced high-level lawyers thought what the government was doing was illegal.
Nadat Tam de informatie gelekt heeft, stort hij zich weer op zijn werk. Maar een collega van Eric Lichtblau bij de New York Times is ook op de hoogte van het programma.
We heard basically that the president had authorized a warrantless wiretapping program. It was believed by the people we were talking to be in violation of FISA and of the Constitution.
They were doing things well outside their lane without the knowledge of most of the court, without the knowledge of most members of Congress, really on the White House's own authority. That was really what, in our mind, made the story.
James Risen wil een officiële reactie van Hayden en belt de NSA.
I told the press person that I needed to talk to Hayden immediately and for a very sensitive matter. And I didn't tell him exactly what it was, but to my surprise, she got him on the phone immediately.
I remember I was sitting next to him. I did not know he was going to do that. It was a bit shocking, not only that he was calling him, but also that he got Hayden on the line.
I read him like 2 paragraphs of the draft of the story. And you could hear like a sharp intake of breath, like, I can't, it was almost like he didn't want to say it, but he was like, I can't believe you've got that story.
I think this is a very bad thing. That, there's a reason we keep intelligence sources and methods secret. It's the same reason journalists try to keep their sources and methods secret. You can't survive unless you keep them secret.
I'd caught him off guard, and he had started to confirm it, and then realized what he was doing and hung up.
Hayden slaat alarm. De New York Times dreigt het bestaan van de program te onthullen. En dat in een verkiezingsjaar.
We were worried that this would compromise a very important, very significant intelligence activity. There was debate within the administration about what to do. Should we try to get an injunction?
Het Witte Huis nodigt de krant uit voor een aantal gesprekken. De eerste keer praten ze in het uitvoerend bureau onder leiding van waarnemend CIA-directeur John McLaughlin.
One thing I remember about his presentation was that he never actually confirmed that they had such a program.
They kept talking in these hypotheticals, like saying, if we were doing this, this would be very important to the government.
The language he used, which was kind of Orwellian in a way, was if the United States had such a program, we would request that the New York Times not publish any information about it.
And then I started taking notes, and they tried to stop me from taking notes. And it was a very contentious meeting that only convinced me further that the story was right and that they were trying to stop it.
Bij elk gesprek herhaalt de regering dat het programma doeltreffend en wettig is.
One of the strongest selling points they made, which to my mind was probably the most disingenuous, was the idea that this had all been legally reviewed, this was all perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, everyone was on board, there was no doubt about its legality.
De reporters zeggen tegen hun eindredacteurs dat de regering liegt, maar die willen hun verhaal niet publiceren.
There were intense discussions and it got emotional on all sides.
We argued that this was really important, that our sources were telling us it was illegal or unconstitutional, that there was clearly people in the government who disagreed with what the officials were saying to the editors.
In de herfst van 2004 nodigt de regering de redacteurs uit voor een gesprek achter gesloten deuren. Hoofdredacteur Bill Keller ontmoette de topadviseurs van de president, onder wie Condoleezza Rice, generaal Hayden en Alberto Gonzales. Ze hameren erop dat onthullingen over het programma de nationale veiligheid in gevaar zullen brengen.
I had a consensus of everybody that we had contact with in the administration that this would be an extremely dangerous thing to do. These were, serious people, a consensus across the board of those who talked to us that it was going to be dangerous, a level of stridency that was quite impressive. And, after much discussion, decided that we weren't ready to go with it.
Keller blokkeert het verhaal. Zo zorgt het Witte Huis dat het programma een goed bewaard geheim blijft.
The president has ordered a major shakeup of America's spy operations.
The nuts and bolts of intelligence will fall to Lieutenant General Michael Hayden, who now heads up the once super...
Generaal Hayden krijgt promotie. Hij gaat toezicht houden op alle buitenlandse inlichtingenoperaties. Zijn vervanger is generaal Keith Alexander. Tom Drake ziet zijn kans schoon om nog eens zijn bezorgdheid te uiten in een vertrouwelijke brief aan de nieuwe NSA-baas.
Within the system, my last official act, for all intents and purposes, was to write that formal letter to Alexander.
Drake schrijft dat het inlichtingenwerk van de NSA helemaal ontspoord is.
This is a crusade for him. Being Drake, someone who's got a somewhat obsessive personality, he keeps trying to get the word out.
Maar op generaal Alexander maken Drake's argumenten ook geen indruk. Bovendien voelen zijn chefs zich gepasseerd door deze brief. Een carrière kan hij nu wel vergeten.
They actually reorganized my job right out from under me, and I literally was left with nothing. I had an office, I had a flag because a senior executive, but nothing else. No programs, no people, no team, no nothing.
Drake is bevriend geraakt met de Thin Thread groep. Binny, Weeby, Loomis en Diana Rourke van het congres. Die groep overweegt nu de zogenaamde nucleaire optie. Naar de pers stappen.
And I can remember throwing the question out there one evening. I said, what do we do? Tom's not getting anywhere. And so we would say, is it time to go to the press? Invoke the nuclear option, which is go to the press. And we were all afraid to do it.
We're still traditional kind of employees. The government wanted to stay inside the government to try to get the government to change its ways, to make it, to right itself. as opposed to having to force it by going to the fourth estate, the public.
The third rail option of going to the press was fraught with enormous peril. At a minimum, you would no doubt be fired, or worse.
Intussen is het bijna een jaar geleden dat de New York Times weigerde het verhaal te publiceren. In die tijd is de program enorm uitgebreid en heeft het illegaal terabytes aan informatie verzameld over de telefoongesprekken en e-mails van miljoenen Amerikanen. Reporter James Risen van de New York Times vindt dat de maat vol is. Hij wil niet langer zwijgen.
The story was dead, now twice dead. And I thought the only way to ever get this story out was to put it in a book.
Risen nodigt Eric Lichtblau uit bij hem thuis om de kladversie voor het eerste hoofdstuk te lezen. Het is het verhaal dat de New York Times geweigerd heeft.
Chapter was just called The Program. And in it, he basically made known the existence of this program and the fact that the administration had gotten the paper to spike the story.
I said, I want to make sure it's okay with you. And he said, the only thing I ask is, put my name in there too.
Al snel krijgt de redactie van de New York Times lucht van Risens plannen.
I began to hear through the grapevine that he might include the NSA story in the book. So that led to a series of, very awkward conversations with Jim.
The editors were furious at me. They thought I was being insubordinate.
He had a gun to their head. They are really being forced to reconsider. The paper's gonna look pretty bad.
That led to this massive game of chicken between me, my book, and the New York Times over the next few months.
De redactie vraagt zich af of ze moet terugkomen op de eerdere beslissingen van haar hoofdredacteur.
Because we had to either decide we're still not ready to run this story, or the situation has changed sufficiently that we are ready to run the story, in which case we better get the story, in its best possible shape and let the administration know.
Op een koude decemberavond worden Bill Keller en Phil Taubman samen met hun uitgever Arthur Sulzberger ontboden op het Witte Huis.
It was indeed a dark and stormy night. I remember it. It was dark and it was stormy. And we were in the Oval. Mr. Sulzberger began to speak, and the president said, I'm going to go first. I want to talk to you about this program. I want to talk to you about why this is important, why we think it saves lives, and why it should not be made public.
Dan geeft de president het woord aan generaal Hayden.
It's hard to brief in the Oval. You can't. There are no visual aids, hard to roll out something in front of somebody. So I gave him the best explanation of the program I could, but I did bring up specific examples.
The example he gives them is a plot in which a radical is planning to bring down the Brooklyn Bridge, apparently with a device similar to a blowtorch. And it actually kind of makes the Times editors kind of scratch their heads because they think this is kind of surprising that somebody could sit there with a blowtorch or something like that and bring down the Brooklyn Bridge without anybody noticing him and stopping him first seemed absurd to them.
I think Arthur believes that the president may have cracked a smile on when the bringing down the Brooklyn Bridge item came up, but maybe that's just a wishful memory.
Nu speelt Bush zijn troef uit. De krant zal mede verantwoordelijk zijn als er weer een aanslag komt.
He said, listen, if you guys publish this article and there is another 9/11, we're going to be called before Congress to explain how we failed to prevent it. And you should be in the chair beside us explaining, because you'll be complicit in allowing damage to our country. He was saying, in effect, you, Arthur Sulzberger, will have blood on your hands if there's another attack that could have been prevented by this program. I think anybody would feel goosebumps.
The New York Times broke the story about the National Security Agency.
Maar de New York Times geeft dit keer niet toe. en onthult het bestaan van de program.
4 years now, the NSA has been secretly spying on its own citizens.
The New York Times story in December 2005 just shocked the world.
The extent of unchecked domestic surveillance is far greater than previously reported.
It is the definition in most people's minds of illegal government activity.
With the bombshell of a story in the New York Times today that the NSA...
In het Witte Huis is het alarmfase rood. Alle ogen zijn op Bush gericht.
We call it the big pause. Okay, when stuff like this goes public, what's the big guy going to do? Is he going to man up and support you? Or suddenly get reflective on you?
And for once, the president actually decides he's going to come out and address it directly. He goes on the offensive to try to push back against critics who said he went too far.
Voor het eerst geeft iemand toe dat het programma bestaat.
This is a highly classified program that is crucial to our national security. Its purpose is to detect and prevent terrorist attacks against the United States, our friends and allies.
The president comes out and minimizes what he describes as the program. And he gives a very truncated description of what they are doing that sounds, you know, I think probably not too worrisome to most Americans.
I authorized the National Security Agency, consistent with U.S. law and the Constitution, to intercept the international communications of people with known links to Al-Qaeda and related terrorist organizations.
Dat is het kleinste en minst omstreden onderdeel. Bush verzwijgt dat het programma ook massaal gegevens inzamelt over binnenlandse communicatie.
His characterization of the fact was simply wrong, and it was wrong from the beginning. The program wasn't to surveil known suspects, known conspirators. You could easily get a warrant for that. The program was to sift big data, was to trawl through enormous volumes, literally trillions of telephone calls, trillions of emails, and to look for unknown conspirators.
Opnieuw moet generaal Hayden de pers inlichten. Ook hij minimaliseert de omvang van het programma.
This is targeted. This is focused. This is about Al-Qaeda. One end of any call targeted under this program is always outside the United States.
When they asked questions about how widespread the program was, he confined it to this little part of the program that had leaked and did not address all the other parts that were far worse that had not leaked.
Hayden vertelt niet dat de NSA het telefoon- en e-mailverkeer binnen de Verenigde Staten controleert. Hij beweert zelfs dat er geen intern verzet tegen het programma is geweest.
Not a single employee of the National Security Agency has addressed a concern about this program to the NSA-IG. Should also add that no member of the NSA workforce who has been asked to be included in this program has responded to that request with anything except enthusiasm.
General Hayden's press conference introduced many of the tactics that the administration has used to deflect questioning and also to mislead the public. And I was amazed at what he was saying because it was not truthful. It was misleading. And that was the beginning of the spinning and the lies.
President Bush heads to the NSA as part of his week-long blitz to defend his controversial wiretapping program.
The White House strategy? Fight back on every point.
Yesterday, it was the president. Today, the attorney general speaks out on the matter.
The president will visit one of the nation's most secret buildings today.
In Fort Meade, het NSA-hoofdkwartier, volgt Thomas Drake nauwlettend de reactie van het Witte Huis.
Drake watches what top levels of the U.S. government saying about this program, and he thinks they're lying.
I realized that they were lying, that they were desperate to protect the domestic surveillance program.
He knows it's much more than what they're describing, and this makes him mad.
The far larger program was the dragnet surveillance, the vast bulk copy of millions and millions of phone records, email records, internet usage, and financial transactional and credit card information.
Al meer dan 4 jaar uit Drake binnen de NSA zijn bezorgdheid. Hij beseft nu dat hem maar één uitweg rest.
All the internal proper channels have been exhausted. The one final choice was to actually touch the third rail and go to the press.
Drake besluit om op eigen houtje te handelen zonder de Thin Thread groep. Hij neemt contact op met een journalist, Siobhan Gorman van de Baltimore Sun.
He just reaches out to her in a way that he thinks is secret, using all kinds of protected hush mail, to tell her he wants to talk to her and might have documents to share with her.
Drake wil alleen niet geheim materiaal leveren.
It's a pretty classic whistleblower kind of move that he makes, and he's careful, he thinks, not to violate any kind of national security laws in reaching out to her.
Gorman begrijpt waarom haar bron contact met haar heeft gezocht.
There were a number of people at NSA that were just very unhappy. And I think that the revelation of warrantless surveillance probably did loosen up some concerns that some people inside NSA might have had.
Drake blijft in het begin helemaal anoniem en stuurt mails in code.
She had no idea who I was. I ultimately was referred to as just a senior official. It was sort of an agreement as to how she would couch who I was in her reporting, but I was a deep source.
Baltimore Sun reports today that the NSA rejected.
And so I provided her unclassified information about the secret surveillance program.
Gorman publiceert een reeks artikelen over de NSA, Thin Thread en de onrechtmatige observatie van miljoenen Amerikanen. Maar Drake is niet de enige die uit de biecht klapt. Een bron van USA Today onthult dat de regering de telefoongegevens van tientallen miljoenen Amerikanen heeft verzameld. Vicepresident Cheney is razend. Hij zweert dat hij de verraders zal stoppen.
You've known Dick Cheney. I've known him for a long time. He was always upset about leakers. So this was not out of character. It fit within the character that he was, whether he was Secretary of Defense or Chief of Staff to the President.
De FBI voert het onderzoek naar de lekken. Een massale klopjacht onder leiding van de nieuwe minister van Justitie, Alberto Gonzales.
They had broke the law. They leaked classified information. That's against the law. The job of the Department of Justice is to prosecute those who break the law.
De FBI begint zijn onderzoek aan de overkant van de straat, bij het departement van Justitie. Ze bellen iedereen op die ooit voor het FISA-court heeft gewerkt. Ook Thomas Tam.
And he starts getting phone calls from this FBI agent, Jason Lawless, at work. He's ducking the calls.
Tam durft niet terug te bellen.
I was preoccupied with what was going to happen to me, and when it was going to happen, what was going to happen, if it was going to happen.
And finally, Lawless gets him on the phone and says, "Hey, this will only take a few minutes."
Tam is zo in paniek dat hij zichzelf verraadt.
I told him that I chose not to talk to him. I chose to exercise my rights under the Constitution to not be a witness against myself. And of course, I knew that that immediately would send up red flags and that I would immediately be their primary suspect.
Thomas Tam neemt ontslag bij Justitie en wacht gelaten op de dagvaarding. Jack Goldsmith is na zijn ontslag bij Justitie teruggekeerd naar Harvard. Op een morgen willen 2 FBI-agenten hem spreken op Harvard Square.
As we were sitting down at the table over coffee, one of the agents sort of sheepishly handed me a manila envelope, and he said that it was a subpoena to be for a grand jury investigation into the leak of the New York Times. And he was very embarrassed and sheepish about this.
De verantwoordelijke is minister van Justitie Alberto Gonzales.
It seemed particularly ironic that the Justice Department was coming after me for illegal actions, or allegedly illegal actions, or possibly illegal actions, taken in connection with this program.
Het is de zomer van 2007. Het FBI-onderzoek is al 18 maanden aan de gang. Omdat de resultaten mager zijn, drijven de agenten hun inspanningen op. Ze vallen 's ochtends vroeg binnen bij de belangrijkste verdachten.
At 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the FBI, with guns drawn, raids the homes of Binney and Wiebe, and out on the West Coast, they raid the home of Diane Rourke, waking her up.
It was quite shocking. And in fact, they went through the whole house and went through every book, every paper, every drawer, turned the mattress over. You know, it was quite shocking.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and I see these blue uniform with gold FBI on the back people coming across left to right, and I said, well, it sent a chill through me immediately.
Well, at first I knew the FBI was in my house was the guy pointing a gun at me when I was coming out of the shower. They took my computer, all the electronic hardware, disks and things that go with that, any kind of electronic storage device. And they also took some of my magazines, technical magazines and papers and things like that.
Hun volgende doelwit is Ed Loomis.
My life was in a shambles at that point. My wife was hysterical. She couldn't believe what had just occurred. I couldn't believe what just occurred. And I had no insight into why it had.
You know, this button is NSA's second highest award. And I wonder what it was that I did personally so wrong that I deserve this kind of treatment.
Here I am, an Eagle Scout, a retired Scoutmaster, and a devout patriot. And my patriotism is being questioned by the government that I'd served for 43 years. I just couldn't, it just didn't make sense to me.
You feel pretty low. Your self-esteem takes a big hit. There's discord in the family because kids, family, wife may ask you, well, what did you do to bring this upon the house?
It tore me up. I became a recluse pretty much. I cut off virtually all social contact with friends. It was rough, very rough.
Ed probably took it worse in terms of cost to family and self, physically, mentally, because Ed went into the shadows. He became a recluse, quiet. He lost his wife.
It's still eating at me, but I've told my family, I told my father before he passed away. I know I've done nothing wrong.
De FBI denkt dat ze betrokken zijn bij het lek naar de New York Times. Ten onrechte, zegt New York Times reporter James Risen nu.
I didn't know any of them, and I just felt badly that they were getting caught up in something that was completely unrelated. I knew that couldn't be true, that was just collateral damage.
De FBI laat Tom Drake nog ongemoeid, maar hij heeft het gevoel dat hij de volgende zal zijn.
Almost 6 months goes by, and Drake still hasn't been raided. But then, on the morning of November 28th, 2007...
I'm seeing these cars pull up as I look out the window. It's just after 7 a.m. in the morning, and there's a dozen FBI agents, and my heart's up in my throat because I realize it's now me.
Volgens het huiszoekingsbevel zoeken ze bewijzen dat Drake het lek is.
Drake, being Drake, sits down at his kitchen table with the FBI agents without a lawyer present and spends the entire day trying to convince them that the real culprits are the people at the NSA who have run this illegal program.
So I told them everything I could, but they didn't want to hear about that. They wanted to hear about the New York Times and sources.
De FBI vertrekt met alle computers en dozen vol papieren. Drake kan alleen afwachten.
A few months later, in April 2008, Drake gets a summons to go meet with somebody who is described as somebody very important.
Het is de federale aanklager Stephen Tyrrell.
When Drake sits down, Tyrrell says to him, "Mr. Drake, you are screwed."
Tyrrell kan niet bewijzen dat Drake gelekt heeft naar de New York Times of geheim materiaal aan de Baltimore Sun heeft gegeven. Desondanks zegt hij dat de FBI geheime documenten op zijn computer en in zijn kelder gevonden heeft. Een zware misdaad.
He proceeded to tell me, how would you like to spend the rest of your life in prison, Mr. Drake, unless you cooperate with our investigation? We have more than enough information to put you away for a long, long time. You better start talking.
And they talked numbers, 478 months, 35 years. The government said he would have the blood of soldiers on his hands for what he did.
Tyrrell wil dat Drake bekent dat hij de spil is van een samenzwering met Rourke, Binney en de anderen.
I was not going to plead out. And he was all ticked off and he says, well, we'll just have to go with what we got.
Er staan hen misschien jaren gevangenisstraf te wachten en ze hebben in ieder geval peperdure advocaten nodig. In hun wanhoop zien ze nog maar één kans. Het toeval wil dat er in 2008 presidentsverkiezingen zijn. En er is één kandidaat die verandering belooft.
Ready to go! Fired up! Ready to go! No more secrecy. That's a commitment I make to you as president.
He is promising to be the most transparent administration in history. He believes that there's been too much secrecy.
He made a real point of owning these kinds of arguments, both as a senator and then on the campaign trail.
It's time for us to change America, and that's why I'm running for president of the United States.
Barack Obama onderstreept het belang van klokkenluiders.
Obama, throughout his history, is a champion of whistleblowers, arguing that they're the folks who help make government better and reveal conduct that, if not is illegal, is questionable.
I certainly had a lot of hope, and I had a lot of hope for hope and change. But I actually thought that somebody might say, you actually did the right thing.
This administration also puts forward...
Obama spreekt zich ook duidelijk uit over de geheimhouding rond het programma.
I will provide our intelligence and law enforcement agencies with the tools they need to track and take out the terrorists without undermining our Constitution and our freedom. That means no more illegal wiretapping of American citizens.
It's not a calibrated statement. This is a political statement. This is, in his words, a surveillance state run amok.
No more ignoring the law when it is inconvenient. That is not who we are. And it's not what is necessary to defeat the terrorists.
It was like he was back at the University of Chicago as a constitutional scholar. He sounded like an ACLU lawyer.
The law is not subject to the whims.
De regering Bush probeert deze laatste maanden de program een permanent statuut te geven.
The debate shifted pretty quickly to Congress in terms of debating whether or not the administration should get the power to do what they were doing.
Bush hoopt dat het congres de program in een wet verankert.
For President Bush, this is really a significant reversal. He's decided he needs Congress to back up what he's done. He, in effect, is abandoning his claim that he has the power under Article 2 of the Constitution to do this without Congress.
De regering stelt een amendement voor op de FISA-wet en brengt het als een hervorming. Maar insiders weten dat het de NSA meer macht geeft dan ooit tevoren.
The FISA Amendment Act of 2008 actually allows some of the things we were doing under the president's authority only against Al-Qaeda. It allows them for all legitimate foreign intelligence purposes. So, in a sense, the FISA Amendment Act not only validates the terrorist surveillance program, it expands it.
De regering lobbyt voor zijn amendement in de niet-openbare zittingen van de toezichtcommissies voor inlichtingendiensten.
You had to read it very, very closely to understand what they were doing. And I don't think people knew what actually the intent of that was. The intent of that was to make legal all of the programs that the Attorney General, the FBI Director had said they had a problem with.
De president hanteert een vertrouwd argument. Als jullie deze wet niet aannemen, kunnen er Amerikanen sterven.
Without this law, our ability to prevent new attacks will be weakened. And it will become harder for us to uncover terrorist plots. We must not allow this to happen. It is time for Congress to pass a law that
Presidentskandidaat Barack Obama moet nu kiezen. Stemt hij voor of tegen de wet?
I remember when the bill came forward, there was some discussion as to whether or not he would support it.
The Senate is expected to vote on a controversial measure to
He was thinking ahead to the general election and how he was a young senator with not a lot of national security experience and how he needed to be seen as being tough on these issues.
Maar achter de schermen groeit Obama's vastberadenheid.
I remember the first conversation I ever had with him during the campaign. I said, look, but when you become president, you have to kill people. And are you willing to pull the trigger? Are you willing to do that side of the job? And he got very silent and looked at me in a very steely kind of way and said, I know that, and I can do that.
U.S. Senate returning final vote on the FISA bill, setting new rules for electronic surveillance.
Nu kan hij zijn geloofwaardigheid versterken.
It gives the government new powers to eavesdrop on both domestic and international communications.
For all of his criticism in the past, for all of his background as a constitutional lawyer and civil libertarian, he chooses to accept the rather expansive law and he votes for it.
Mr. Obama,
Senator Obama getting a lot of heat for this vote, much of it from his own supporters.
Senator Barack Obama voted for the surveillance bill despite his opposition to it in the past, and today's vote appears to be...
Off to work for President Obama. It's a busy first day.
It takes over 2 wars, a staggering economy, and a soaring federal budget.
6 maanden later is Obama zelf president en opperbevelhebber.
He's wasting no time. He's taking on national security right from the start.
Meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other military advisors.
The first time that Barack Obama ever learns about the full scale of this program is an early briefing in the Situation Room about all of the data that the NSA is collecting in these domestic surveillance programs.
The point of the briefing was to provide the president and the new national security team at the White House with an overview of how these programs worked, what the value of the programs was, the legal structures that supported the programs, what the authority was.
Hij hoort nu dat er in het geheim een ontstellende hoeveelheid communicatiegegevens verzameld is.
As we talked about these programs, the way they were used, in particular, the value of the collection of content, of an extraordinarily vital tool, that the idea was, all right, this is a really important program, we need to maintain it.
Zijn naaste adviseurs hameren op het belang van dit programma.
There was very strong view in the intelligence community that this was an important program, that it did fill an important gap.
De kersverse president moet beslissen of hij de program aan banden legt.
I think that the president approached this with the degree of seriousness that you would hope and expect from the president of the United States.
When you get into office, when you're the man, when you're in the White House, you don't want to give up any tools that you inherit. You don't want to give up anything that might get you that one fact that will stop an attack.
Hij neemt zijn besluit. De program blijft doorgaan.
He had a chance to say, well, that's too far. Let's not sweep in quite so many people who don't have anything to do with terrorism as part of this broad sweep. And he chose to keep the programs largely intact.
I'm not aware of any case in which Obama pushed back hard and said, you can't do that.
Nu Obama overtuigd is van de noodzaak van de program, gaat hij er helemaal voor. De NSA besteedt nu meer dan $10 miljard per jaar aan het onderscheppen van communicatie over de hele wereld.
The NSA was on the verge of what it came to call the golden age of electronic surveillance because there was so much more communication, so much more data, so much better computer capacity to process it, and it was there for the taking.
Voor de praktische kant is de NSA afhankelijk van een aantal privéondernemingen die hooggekwalificeerde computerprogrammeurs en technici leveren.
The NSA, CIA and other intelligence services suddenly realized that they needed people with those kind of skills.
De 25-jarige Edward Snowden is één van die mensen. Hij is in Maryland opgegroeid, niet ver van het NSA-hoofdkwartier.
He grew up in the community where lots of people who are in the military and the intelligence community live. His father was on the Coast Guard for 30 years.
If you've been to a Ron Paul rally, you've seen lots of people who look exactly like Edward Snowden. You know, young, clean-cut student, passionate about the Constitution.
Snowden beëindigt zijn vrijwillige legerdienst als hij beide benen breekt.
And he had the reaction after 9/11 that a lot of patriotic young Americans had, which is, I'd like to do my part. And that brought him to the NSA and the CIA and the worlds of secret intelligence.
In 2009 werkt Snowden als NSA-adviseur in Japan. Zo komt hij bijzonder veel te weten over alle activiteiten die de Amerikaanse veiligheid moeten waarborgen.
And he really began to understand the true scope of how much the NSA had gotten its hands into the backbone of the internet.
Langzamerhand stijgt zijn verontwaardiging.
It was a gradual accumulation of evidence and of observations that led him to think something's going wrong here. The balance is out of whack. The surveillance of ordinary people is far greater than I would have imagined and far greater than the American public has been able to debate.
Snowden stuit onder meer op een geheim rapport van de inspecteur-generaal van de NSA over de program.
It tells the entire secret history of the program. It talks about Addington and Hayden writing the authorization for the program.
According to General Hayden, the Vice President's counsel, David Addington, drafted the first authorization.
It talks about the rebellion at the Justice Department.
Consequently, the White House counsel, rather than the Attorney General, signed the 11 March 2004 authorization.
It's the entire unadulterated history of these programs.
And he told me that reading the Inspector General's report, it made a big impression on him. He felt like people had done things that were wrong and had not been held accountable for them.
De nieuwe president brengt niet de beloofde verandering.
His hope was that Obama would be a force for transparency, and that's not what happened. And that was another of the pivotal moments in which Snowden realized it was going to have to be him.
Terwijl Snowden nadenkt over wat hij moet doen, stort justitie zich op het van Bush geërfde onderzoek naar de lekken onder leiding van zijn nieuwe minister Eric Holder.
What's interesting is that these cases from the Bush era linger on. They don't just throw them out. They revisit them and they keep going after the enemies of national security agencies, much as they'd done under Bush.
Ondanks zijn steunbetuigingen aan klokkenluiders doet Obama niets om de rechtsvervolging te voorkomen.
This president personally really doesn't like people leaking classified information. He takes that very seriously and he thinks that we should all take it very seriously.
In every conversation that Obama had that I have heard about, he said, when it comes to national security, you leak classified information that could endanger people, we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Het is Thomas Drake die keihard wordt aangepakt.
couldn't indict us all, so they went after the one that they could at least show an example to the rest of the intelligence analysts. You speak, you go to the press, you're going to get hammered. These were the lessons that were supposed to come out of being raided and then in Tom's case indicted.
Op 14 april 2010 wordt Thomas Drake in staat van beschuldiging gesteld.
I was arraigned. Before I was arraigned before the judge, I was fingerprinted, by the U.S. Marshals with the FBI, agent watching. I was a direct threat to the national security of the United States. I truly had become an enemy of the state.
Hij wordt aangeklaagd op grond van de spionagewet.
And I'm facing a distinct prospect of having the rest of my life spent behind bars, effectively.
Alleen de aanklacht al is genoeg om Drake te ruïneren.
He spent 2 years draining all his resources on a private attorney, and then when he had no more money, he had to go to a public defender.
It was extraordinarily lonely. I mean, life had become already extremely difficult. All the income I had, all retirement's gone, your life is turned upside down. You're persona non grata. I ended up finding work, initially part-time, then full-time at an Apple store.
Het Openbaar Ministerie baseert zich vooral op de zogezegd geheime documenten die bij de huiszoeking gevonden zijn. De verdediging schakelt auteur en journalist James Bamford in.
Was hired as a consultant by the defense and was able to find basically all the information that they were charging him with. It was already in the public domain. Not only that, it had been placed in the public domain by the government itself.
I looked at the stuff that he was indicted for. That material was clearly marked unclassified.
It was not stamped classified until after it was seized from Tom Drake's home.
And all they did was draw a line through it and classified that material. And so then they charged him with having classified material. It's like framing him. And we're going to frame you after the fact.
De regering blijft erbij dat de documenten die bij Drake zijn gevonden staatsgeheimen bevatten. Maar enkele dagen voor het proces wordt de aanklacht opeens ingetrokken.
It was astounding. Basically, Drake went from someone charged with such serious crimes that he could spend the rest of his life in prison to having it bargained down because the Justice Department could see it was falling apart to a misdemeanor where he spent no time at all in prison.
Drake pleit schuldig op het punt van ongeoorloofd gebruik van een overheidscomputer. Hij wordt veroordeeld tot een administratieve boete van $25, een jaar proeftijd en een werkstraf. Geen van de andere verdachten wordt ooit aangeklaagd. Er zijn ruim 10 jaar verstreken. Ondanks de onthullingen van insiders zoals Drake en de berichten in de pers is een massale publieke verontwaardiging uitgebleven. De program breidt zich ongehinderd verder uit. Maar Edward Snowden werkt nu in een geheime bunker in Hawaii voor een andere aannemer. Hij bereidt zijn eigen manier voor om de program aan de kaak te stellen.
FBI has raided the offices established to protect federal whistleblowers.
Snowden heeft goed bestudeerd wat andere klokkenluiders, zoals de Thin Thread groep, Tam en met name Drake gedaan hebben.
What I've learned from Drake and Binney is that you can be discredited or people won't know whether to believe you if you don't have proof. And it was because of that he decided it had to be documents. And it had to be a lot of documents.
New York Times broke the story after holding it for a year.
Snowden is niet van plan om net als Tam naar de New York Times te stappen.
Paper faces questions about why it held that story.
Snowden was disgusted at the New York Times for, having that story before the election, sitting on it for month after month, and he had a real antipathy towards the New York Times as a result of the way it behaved over Ryzen.
Snowden neemt niet de New York Times in vertrouwen, maar Glenn Greenwald van The Guardian, Barton Gellman van The Washington Post en documentairemaakster Laura Poitras. Hij begint ze systematisch kopieën te verstrekken van documenten die veel van de best bewaarde staatsgeheimen bevatten.
Snowden had clearances for human intelligence. He had clearances for many compartments of electronic surveillance. And he had a third set of powers, which is actually called super user. It's a very potent combination that opened many doors to him.
Here is this low-level analyst who is able to access, if you believe the government, 1.7 million documents and walk out of the agency with them without them having the slightest idea that it was taking place.
This was a stupendous intelligence breach. This was the largest collection of classified information, the largest leak of classified information that had ever occurred in the history of the United States, or indeed the history of the world.
Het programma van de NSA loopt nu pas echt gevaar.
NSA has collected millions of contact lists.
Intercepts hundreds of thousands of email address books every day.
Could allow the NSA to map out a person's life.
Communication links by Gmail.
A new bombshell allegation that our government has NSA collects nearly everything a user does on the internet.
En zo begon voor Edward Snowden een periode die zijn leven grondig overhoop zou gooien. Snowden verblijft vandaag de dag op een geheime plek in Rusland. Volgende week in deel 3 van The United States of Secrets meer over Snowden, maar ook over de rol die bedrijven als Google en Facebook gespeeld hebben voor de NSA. Graag tot volgende week donderdag.
And they're thinking, look at all this data about people's behavior that's just flying out there to hundreds of different parties and oftentimes not encrypted. And so they can just snatch it.
Of course, if you're an NSA collections manager and you want to know, how do I figure out, where Bart was or whether he's changed devices or all this other kind of information about him, why don't I just go and get that information that conveniently has been collected for me by Silicon Valley companies who do it for their own commercial motives?